Give one more round of applause for Cassie. So, our next speaker of this evening is a personal friend of mine. It's Saren. Saren is a fifth-year health science student who is involved in the PAACx community as an Asia mentor and ASU dance choreographer. I'm sure some of you are performing his choreo to Every Summertime for the ASU set, the Dance For Me. As an Asian, transmasculine, non-binary person in a primarily white gender binary society, Saren came to realize the need to redefine masculinity in search of becoming him. Through his PAACx talk, Saren hopes to share his journey to authenticity, express gratitude for the love and support he's received, and provide ways the PAACx community and beyond can better support the gender diverse community moving forward. Please give a round of applause for Saren.
Hello. Hello. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Cool. Okay. Thank you to Gabe for the wonderful introduction. My name is Nonoyama. I use he, him pronouns, and I am here today to give my PAACx talk on becoming him, redefining masculinity. So before I continue, I want to give a quick content warning that I will be mentioning transphobia and sexual harassment, and so please feel free to step out and take care of yourself if you need to at any point during the talk. So, surprise, I am transgender, if you didn't know already. To be more specific, I am transmasculine, non-binary. So what do these words mean? For those who might not be familiar, I'd like to give some quick definitions. Transmasculine, to me, refers to those who are assigned female at birth, but do not identify as female. And non-binary means being outside of the gender binary, being neither solely man nor woman. And now a quick disclaimer that these definitions can definitely vary, but these are the ones that work for me. So although I am confidently transgender, transmasculine, and non-binary, I of course didn't always look like this or identify this way. And so before I continue, I'd like to give a quick rundown of my transition so far. So in 2000, I was born female, and by around age 8 or 9, I was a stereotypical tomboy. I despised skirts and dresses and spent most of my time in t-shirts and basketball shorts. That's until puberty hit in middle school, when I felt pressured to conform to what society wanted me to be as a woman, which was feminine and straight. But fast forward to high school, in sophomore year, I came out as lesbian, and I started to wear masculine clothes like I always wanted to. And that photo behind me actually is a comparison of the last time I ever wore a dress versus the first time I wore a suit, taken only 2 months apart back in 2017. When these photos were taken, I was actually confidently a woman. I just wanted to be masculine, that's all it was. But in senior year of high school, things changed. The gender dysphoria hit, and it hit hard. I distinctly remember this random day in high school. I was just chatting with my friends, it was a casual conversation, and I was using she, her pronouns at the time. But all I could hear during this conversation was she, in reference to me, and each time it felt like a stab in the stomach. And that's when I knew something was wrong. So I did some research, and eventually, after a long time, I came to the conclusion that I'm transgender, I'm transmasculine, and non-binary. One of the first things to change was my hair. I used to love my long hair, actually, but now I couldn't stand looking in the mirror. My hair felt foreign to me. It felt like it wasn't part of my body. And so on New Year's Day, in senior year of high school, I came out to my mom as non-binary and asked her to chop it all off. She was hesitant, but she did it. And so shout out to my mom for doing that, that was great. So I love her, but next came the chest dysphoria. This is bad, okay. I remember walking home from school one day, and I was just walking on the sidewalk. I looked to the side, and I see my reflection on the window of a parked car. I felt sick. I felt nauseous. I didn't want to believe that that's what I looked like to the world. And so, after coming out with he, him pronouns in my senior year of high school, right before I graduated, I bought my first compression binder. which is meant to make my chest appear flat. It was a huge moment of relief and gender euphoria, and I felt like I could finally see part of myself in the mirror. But this didn't last very long, unfortunately. I started college and I wore binders every single day, all day. They started to cause a lot of health problems, and the chest dysphoria was only getting worse by the day. I was hyper-aware of my chest, tugging at my shirt obsessively to hide any unwanted shadows. I was always conscious of the shirts that I wore so that the binder wouldn't show by the neckline, and I honestly felt, and I couldn't even hug my loved ones without feeling uncomfortable. I felt like I couldn't breathe, suffocated not only physically by the chest binder, but by the seemingly inseparable ties that I felt my body had to my birth sex. And so I decided to pursue top surgery. After a two-year very long process, on May 18th, 2020, it finally happened. I finally got top surgery, and that's the photo from top surgery. And fast forward to now, 2 years later, it's 2022, 22 years old, I stand in front of you all sharing my story. Now that was a very quick 5-minute recap of the 22 years of my life, and it of course does highlight my major milestones, but none of it would have been possible without learning a few key lessons that I'd like to share with you all today. In search for becoming him, for becoming my authentic self, I had to ask myself, what does it mean to be non-binary? What does it mean to use he, him pronouns to present masculinely? One of the first lessons that I learned was that identity does not equal expression. There is absolutely no correlation between what pronouns you use, what gender identity you hold, how you look, how you act, or how you sound. Understanding that gender identity, which is how you feel internally, and gender expression, which is how you present to the world, are two completely separate concepts, has allowed me the freedom and confidence to just be non-binary. Just because I use he, him pronouns, and I present masculinely, doesn't mean I need to be a man. I can be non-binary, and that's more than okay. Once I figured out my gender identity, I turned to the internet to see if other people had similar experiences as me. Which brings me to my second point, the lack of representation. An overwhelming majority of people that I came across on the internet were white trans men who fell within society's gender binary. They'd taken testosterone and had undergone gender-affirming surgeries. So there's not only a lack of trans-masculine non-binary representation, but also a lack of Asian trans representation in general. This made coming out or affirming my gender to my family a bit of a challenge. I couldn't just go on YouTube, search up coming out stories of Japanese trans-masculine non-binary people, like with stories of white trans men. And to make matters harder, the Japanese language severely lacks the vocabulary to describe trans experiences. For example, sex and gender are the same word, it's seibutsu, and transgender is just transgender. And with such deeply embedded gender roles and norms in Japanese culture, being non-binary seemed impossible. So when affirming my gender to my family, I had to figure it out all on my own. With the lack of terminology in Japanese to label my experiences, I focused instead on what being transmasculine non-binary really meant to me. At the end of the day, it wasn't so much about changing my gender as it was just trying to feel happy and safe in my own skin. And all my family ultimately wanted was just that. It was for me to be happy and safe. Lastly, I learned one of, if not the most important, the most difficult lesson, which was that transphobia is a reflection of them, not of me. Now let me explain this a little bit more. So the purpose of my entire transition so far has been to become him, to become my authentic self. I cut my hair, I replaced my wardrobe, I wore a binder, and I got top surgery. But none of this put an end to the transphobia. Even though I came into college confidently using he, him pronouns, and everything about me appeared stereotypically masculine, an overwhelming majority of people that I know at Northeastern have misgendered me at least once. It was hard not to let this transphobia get to me. It was much easier just looking at the mirror and questioning why people were perceiving me as a woman. Was it my voice? Was it my face, my body, my mannerisms? I wanted desperately to change, to be less feminine, to erase every lingering bit of womanhood. I never wore makeup, I never wore nail polish. I avoided piercing my ears for a very long time, and I kept my hair really short, all in hopes of less people misgendering me, even if it meant just one less person. And in some ways, eliminating my femininity, it worked. I'd be perceived as masculine at times, but in ways that perpetuated transphobia. Back when I started presenting masculine, but still used women's restrooms, I would get chased into the restroom, verbally harassed that I'm in the wrong place, and forced to justify my gender in front of strangers in the middle of a public restroom. Or better yet, people treated my gender as a guessing game. Are you a boy or a girl? Are you a man or a woman? What are you? And believe it or not, one patient I worked with asked me in a clinic full of people, "Your face is so pretty, but where are your titties?" And no matter how hard I tried to get people to see me for me, I still felt like I was being tossed around and pulled apart as society desperately tried to fit me within the boxes of man or woman. There was a time when I strongly considered going on testosterone just so that I could put an end to this transphobia. I thought maybe if my voice was deeper, if my face was more masculine, I was more muscular, or I grew facial hair, maybe people would finally respect my pronouns, or even better, my existence. But Skylar Baylor, one of the few role models that I have in the Asian trans-masculine community, once said, "Transphobia is a reflection of them, not of us." This was a game changer. Transphobia, whether it's misgendering, discrimination, or violence, is a reflection of the perpetrator, of their ignorance, of their bigotry, of their lack of education, and not at all a reflection of whether I am trans enough or whether my existence is valid. I finally realized that I didn't owe anyone anything. I didn't owe anyone a justification for my gender, and most importantly, I didn't owe anyone my life. I owed it to myself to be authentic, to be able to love who I am. So after spending so long playing what turned out to be an impossible game of trying to meet society's expectations of me, I stopped changing for the convenience of others. I realized that I needed to change for myself, and that's when I began redefining masculinity. Although redefining masculinity is very much an ongoing process of learning and unlearning, so far I've been working on recognizing my masculine privilege and embracing my femininity. Back when I presented feminine, I experienced a lot of catcalling. But ever since transitioning, I've not once been catcalled by a stranger. And to add to that, feminine presenting friends have told me that they felt safer walking with me at night because I present masculine. This all reminded me that masculinity is not just about gender expression, but it's about power and privilege. I realized that I can and I need to use my privilege as a now masculine presenting individual to continue advocating for women and fellow gender diverse people. And in redefining masculinity, I've also been exploring feminine expression. I've started to paint my nails and wear makeup at times, both of which I couldn't have even imagined doing earlier in my transition. I've also come to realize that there's really no need to erase or abandon my womanhood, that I can appreciate what growing up as a woman has provided me, like being comfortable with emotional expression and vulnerability. And so by redefining masculinity and learning to truly live for myself, I've realized the power of authenticity. I no longer try so hard to justify my gender. I have more confidence in advocating for myself and taking up space. And I'm standing here now giving a whole PAACx talk about my trans identity, which I couldn't have even imagined doing a few years ago. Though I'm proud of myself for getting to where I am now, it wouldn't have been possible without the privileges that I hold. I'm grateful for the gender diverse people who came before me, who paved the way for my generation, many of whom were Black and brown trans women. I'm grateful to have grown up in the US, particularly in progressive liberal areas where I felt safe enough to express myself and had access to gender-affirming care. I'm grateful for my friends and family who have loved and supported me and helped me to put myself first. And lastly, I am grateful to the Northeastern PAACx community for this powerful platform to share my story. But I cannot emphasize enough that my experience is not every gender diverse person's experience. Transphobia is painfully real, prevalent, and violent. It permeates every facet of our lives, and even now, I still find myself hiding my identity or conforming to gender norms for safety purposes so that I can protect myself. I deepen my voice or avoid talking altogether so as not to out myself. I sometimes even avoid drinking water so that I don't have to deal with gendered restrooms. So in our current society, where gender diverse identities and experiences are often targeted, neglected, or erased, the least we can do is to make Northeastern, and more specifically the PAACx community, a safe space to ensure that our gender diverse peers feel a sense of belonging. I myself have been misgendered far too many times to count by people in the PAACx community. I found myself avoiding going to events and socializing because the only way to guarantee not being misgendered was to isolate myself. So we all, especially cisgender people, must take concrete steps to make sure gender diverse people feel safe and comfortable within our community. So one of the easiest ways you can do this is to introduce yourself with pronouns and ask others for theirs. And make it a habit to ask everyone, because only asking people who look trans or look non-binary is perpetuating harmful stereotypes. When in reality, like I mentioned before, appearance has nothing to do with pronoun usage or gender identity. And once you ask for pronouns, actually use them and actually remember them. Second, put time and effort into unlearning the gender binary. It's hard, but whenever you find yourself assuming someone's pronouns or gender identity, stop to ask yourself why you assumed that, and work to avoid making the same assumptions in the future. Third, listen to gender diverse voices. My story is just one story. Listen to and amplify the voices of others as well. But make sure not to expect everyone to share their story with you. You have to put in the work to educate yourself, because gender diverse people do not owe you their emotional labor or vulnerability. And lastly, advocate. Talk about trans issues, donate to organizations, and vote to protect trans rights if you're able to. If you notice someone misgendering or making transphobic comments, try your best to intervene, or at the very least, provide support to the person experiencing the transphobia. By taking such efforts and steps to support and advocate for our gender diverse peers, we can begin to foster a community that allows them to feel safe, heard, and true to themselves. And to anyone who may be going through a process of self-discovery, whether it's about gender identity or not, I hope you can take with you that your life and your identities are yours, not anyone else's. You owe it to yourself to become your most authentic self, to become you. Thank you.